Welcome everyone to this week's interview. Today I am sitting down with a five-time championship winner, founder of the Traffic Safety Education Program. He is Mr. Andy Pilgrim. Andy, how are you doing today?
Good, thanks, man. Good. Thank you so much, Brandon.
Man, yeah, like I was saying, I'm super excited to have you on. I know a lot of people watching this will love seeing you, seeing what you've been up to, and kind of seeing your past and all. I guess jumping right into it, how did you first get into auto racing?
Well, as a kid, I was very interested in cars, motorcycles, things like that. But there was no racing in my family at all. My dad there was a local racetrack. My dad used to go and watch called Mallory Park in England, and he would go watch. He liked motorcycle racing. He wasn't really into cars. For me, I always thought I'd like to try racing, but car racing was sort of where I was wanting to go. But economically speaking, there was no chance of that. So I went to school, worked hard, whatever, became a computer programmer out of school. And as soon as I was earning money, I had a piece of garbage old motorcycle, secondhand 70-year-old motorcycle, and I essentially stuck numbers on it and went racing. I didn't have a car, I didn't have a trailer, didn't have anything. So I would either ride it to the racetrack because it was production-based motorcycle, or have a friend of mine drop me off at the racetrack. And one of the guys that was sort of, I'd give him gas money and he'd just pick up the bike if it was a long way, it was a miserable raining day or something, and he'd drop off. He had a bread van. He made a bread round at like 3 o'clock in the morning till 5 o'clock in the morning in England to the local villages. And then he'd come and pick me up. I had the best smelling motorcycle in the paddock. It smelled like fresh bread when he dropped me off. That's essentially how I started. Very simply, I wanted to try. My parents weren't happy about it because motorcycle racing was definitely back then very, very, very dangerous. I lost several friends racing back then. You literally, if you fell off, it wasn't like into a gravel trap. It was into a brick wall, into a tree, stone buildings on some of the racetracks. They just weren't built for the safety that they are now in the last 40 odd years.
Now, so now was if I had it correct, you kind of jumped more to stock car, or not stock car, but auto racing itself, like in cars, when you got over to the US. Was the
Exactly.
plan always that you were like, when that's my dream is to be in a car, or did you have plans of continuing the motorcycle racing?
I had a plan to always be going towards racing cars if I possibly could. It was just economically unfeasible in England, completely unfeasible. So going to bikes was like, let me try racing. I started winning things almost immediately. Not at a high level. Obviously, you start at club racing, regional racing, national races. I ended up winning national British championship stuff, races. And so I was doing well, but 2.5 years into that, I got a job offer in the United States. And I'd always had this fascination with the US. We had an older family friend who was probably 10 years older than me. And he had come over here, and he used to come back when I was a young kid telling stories about California and sunshine and all kinds of wonderful stuff. And that was like, my eyes were this big. I got to go there one day. And you see all the American shows on TV, and the progress, computer programming, little known to me at the time, there was a big need for programmers in the US. And because of my training in the UK, there were jobs. I didn't even know this newspaper came every day to the office in England with jobs in the US. And that's how it came about. I applied, got hired by a US company, and came over here in the early 1980s. The racing car stuff kind of came from that, in the sense like, wow, I learned enough. I went autocrossing. We're very, very, I'm sure you people listening know what autocross is in a parking lot. Essentially some cones. It's competition. You can take a street car and do it. That's how I started. And then I bought a secondhand little race car again that was street legal, and just had no choice. I drove it to the racetrack. I didn't have a truck. I didn't have a trailer. And the first race, I was living in Dallas, Texas, and the first race was in Riverside, California. And it was 1,400-mile drive to that race. And so that's how my racing car started. And I ended up not crashing it that day and winning some money. Didn't win the race. I finished ninth, I think, qualified 18th out of 51 cars. finished ninth, won $500. And honestly, I thought I'd won the Indy 500 at that point. And even slept in the car when we couldn't afford of course I couldn't afford a hotel room a lot of times. So it very, very simply managed not to crash it, won Rookie of the Year that year. That's, long story short, that's essentially how it started that first year.
Now, off the track, one of the coolest things you've been able to do has been the Traffic Safety Education Foundation. For you, why was it so important that you jump in and start educating young drivers?
Essentially, my mother and my godmother were charity-minded people. In particular, my godmother, actually, in particular, my mom too. You go and help people in the local town, local villages, if you want to call it that. People needed some help. You would just go do things. It was just sort of normal for my mom, especially my godmother, to do those things. When I was little, I couldn't stay by myself, so I got dragged along to some of this stuff. So I got to play soccer with my friends on a Saturday maybe, but then I'd have to go off and do this other stuff on a Sunday, or vice versa. And I think it just stuck. So when the racing started to go well, towards the mid-90s, racing was going well. I was getting paid to race cars on a regular basis, but I still had a full-time job. I started my own business, my own IT business in 1989 to give me more time to try and race, because I had no sponsorship. It was all started with basically nothing. I came to the States with $106 in my pocket. So this was all very, very step by small step. And then about 1995, things were going well enough on both sides. The little business had taken off okay, and that was my fallback, right? Who knew I was going to get paid to drive race cars to be in this old? So the IT consulting company was my fallback stuff. And then it was like, okay, these are going okay. It's time to give back. That was simply, it was just like, now I have to give back. It wasn't even a real thought process. And traffic safety seemed to be a natural way to go. And I essentially produce education materials for parents with kids of all ages, believe it or not just kids learning to drive. Obviously the students learning to drive, driver education teachers use my stuff, corporate safety officers use my stuff. It's very, very different. And I'm still very much involved with that, obviously today, producing more and more different. I've just done a new video on driver aid technology, how you should be using it and not abusing it and leaning on it like it works 100%, because it doesn't. We have to still be conscious driving with this stuff. We shouldn't be sitting in the back seat of a Tesla, you know, putting stuff on YouTube. That's really not smart, as unfortunately people are finding out. So that side of it. And also I just made a new traffic safety production on street racing and street stunting, the dangers of that. So it's really a fun project for me. It's a give back project, and tens of thousands of driver education teachers are now using my stuff in their classrooms as an addition to the curriculum, the long curriculums that they have to follow. They add in the things that, hey, this stuff will help you be safer as you learn to drive. But it's essentially, it's a give back project.
Yeah, it's awesome. Me and my wife, actually, this past weekend, we were talking about, we had someone, I forget what they did, but we were like, why would they do that in the road? That's not how you drive or whatever. And we were talking about how so many drivers, they take their test and that's it. So you have people that, you know, may have taken their test 40 years ago and there's no update on what's happened. And then I was like, man, what's cool with your program is that not only do you step in and help kind of bring people up to speed or help the people who are now getting into the car, but also, like, you know, as a race car driver, I feel like people are going to listen, because it's, you know, it's not their parent coming up and saying, you need to do this. Now it's, oh, here's a cool race car driver telling me to do this, you know?
Yeah, the biggest problem is two things, really. The smartphone has caused the massive increase in distracted driving, not just texting while driving. That's like last century. It's the problem that you can do so many other things while you are on a hands-free phone call, for instance. There's a combined distraction driving problem, which is additional to the fact that people manipulate the smartphone and look at it, listen to it, play with it while they're driving, but also they're doing other things. They might be eating or drinking or chatting or looking up emails while they're on a hands-free phone call. I mean, there's so many problems with that, which we can't go into. And the other side of it is there is really no driving test in the US. And that's the problem. The driving test is very, very easy. To get a license here is too easy. Too easy in the sense that we're killing people unnecessarily. Over 50% of the people that get a new license in the US every year, more than 50% of them, which is obviously predominantly young drivers, they don't get 1 minute of structured driver education, but they still pass this test. That's not a test. It's very, very sad. It should be outrageous, but it's not. So all I can do is help parents understand that from the moment you turn the child safety seat around to face front, your kid is paying attention to your driving and learning from your habits. So stop speeding up for yellow lights, stop running red lights, don't roll through stop signs, try and follow the speed limits, and for goodness sake, stay off the phone, hands-free or otherwise, while your young kids are in the car. Because when they're learning at that young age, that's fixed behavior. So it's a tough one, but I'm going to keep going.
That's awesome. Moving on, you had the opportunity to race alongside Dale Earnhardt at the 24 Hours of Daytona 20 years ago. What was that experience like? You know, I guess going into it, did you have this idea of, oh, I've heard stories, or, oh man, I've knew about Earnhardt, and then also I've always heard this rumor that there was plans to get you in a stock car before his accident. I guess secondary, how true were those rumors?
Well, going back to, there's so many Earnhardt stories from that time. Obviously, how long is your show, right? Because I got to know him over the 5 months after he sent me a letter, essentially saying like he wanted me. He saw the pass that I made at Road Atlanta, the Petit Le Mans, winning Petit Le Mans. He saw the pass. He sent me a letter saying that pass is exactly why I want you to be my teammate for the next year's 24 Hours of Daytona. That was the first time I heard about anything. I heard nothing that there was even a rumor of him potentially running a Corvette. So that's when it started, which was October 2000, October 2000. And then from there, things progressed to the fact, we became friends. It was the thing about the whole up to the race sort of was a blur of 5 months, essentially. Many stories, fun times, meeting up with him, traveling with him. The first time I met him, again, I can go into as many of these as you want, but essentially once we had the race weekend over, I got another letter from Dale, which, he intimated about, you guys have given, you gave us so much for this race to Dale Jr. and I, we got to find a way to repay the debt someday. That was in the letter. It was really Steve Crisp talking to me afterwards that Steve Crisp was his right-hand guy for so many years. Steve's just an awesome guy. And Steve was the one that told me more after he passed away, in the sense that there was a trophy room at his place, the Garage Mahal there. And he was basically, he was told me when they got back, he said, Steve, clear this place out. This is going to be where we put the Corvettes in. This is what we're going to do with Corvettes going forward. As far as, the other part about the getting into a NASCAR race car, that was something, again, that Steve spoke to me about, but I had not specifically heard that, except then Dale Jr. called me. And Dale Jr. called me and said, hey, and this was like 2007, and called me and said, my dad and I spoke, and we wanted to, my dad and I, we thought, put you in a cup car. And it was obviously it was a Busch series at that point with the Nationwide series. I can't quite remember if it was Busch or Nationwide now, but anyway, in the 88 car, that happened for a couple of races. And then in 2011, I got an opportunity to do a Sprint Cup race. But I think that all came from Dale speaking. Steve Crisp heard it, but I wasn't specifically told at that point. This came to me after the fact. And then Junior was the one that confirmed it and said in 2008, my dad and I spoke, and that was, it was like, it was pretty special, actually. It was pretty special. I enjoyed both those nationwide races in the Navy car, and also managing just to get in a Sprint Cup in the big series car back in 2011. That was an additional thing. Didn't come from Junior, but I'm sure him putting me in the nationwide car helped those people give me a call and say, hey, we want someone to try and qualify for Sonoma.
Yeah.
Lots of different stories there. Sorry if I got sideways, but that sort of answers your questions, I think. But it was a huge honor to run with him. The huge honor to run with the guy. I mean, obviously I knew about him, and you follow NASCAR, and it was just, it was great. A great, wonderful 5 months with obviously a terribly tragic ending. Horrible, sadly.
Yeah, like you said, I feel like you could probably fill a couple of hours with just that weekend of the 24 hours. There's just so much.
Yeah, and the stories around it. I mean, there's just the stories. I mean, he called me just on the off chance. I mean, he called me about, I'm building my new boat, and I want to ask you about mopeds. So he just called me on randomly asking about mopeds, because do you think I'd try these? About bikes and this, like, I said, yeah, there you can get this and you can do that. I said, all right, this is good. He just randomly called me about stuff, and it was Dale Earnhardt. It was probably nothing for him, but for me, I was like, yeah, sure, Dale, we can no problem. I got a minute for you. I got a minute. It was great, and especially coming from sports car background, not the NASCAR background like I was. It was a lot of fun. It was a lot of good memories, as you say, especially several of those trips.
Yeah.
Meeting him for the first time in Mooresville, running him around the racetrack in Sebring, taking a helicopter ride to RPM tonight. I mean, there's so many bits and pieces that came up from that. A lot of good stories, a lot of good memories.
Like you touched on, you eventually had the opportunity to race a stock car with Junior Motorsports. I've always wondered, whenever you're going from, a background like in IMSA or whatever, whenever you jump into a stock car, even if you're familiar with the racetrack, is it something that makes it easier because you know the track, or does it make it more difficult because you're used to, braking at the, the 2 marker, whereas in a stock car, you got to brake at the 4 marker or whatever?
Yeah. It makes a big difference. It definitely makes a big difference. My background coming from showroom stock cars actually helped. Because in mid-90s, I won my first championship in a Pontiac Firebird Formula car, which was a heavy car. And I think running with those cars, running against Mazdas, running against BMW M3s, much more nimble cars in those heavy cars, having to manage brakes, having to only a finite amount of grip in a heavy car. That actually felt familiar to me when I got in the nationwide car, and it didn't feel too different. So the power was way more, definitely. The power was way more. The brakes were not as good as the Pontiac, so I had to figure that out. But the grip levels were similar because, the tires just aren't that grippy. They're pretty good, but reasonably so. So there was a familiarity just because of my showroom background. And I think talking to some of the guys that have gone from like IndyCar, and other people, not without naming names, and have struggled a bit, I think that was partially because the Indy cars are so much lighter. They've got so much downforce. They're more like going, from a GT3 car to a NASCAR would have been much more of a big jump backwards in the sense of grip and braking. But because of my showroom background, I think I took to it reasonably quickly, and it wasn't such a huge step because I'm so used to cars moving around all over the place. And I have not had I had some prototype experience, but it's been a much smaller part of my background. And for me, it's much easier to go to a prototype for me, but for them to come back sometimes. And that's why I think sometimes some of the guys you think are going to be super fast, they struggle in a NASCAR race car just because of that. It's they just not used to the cars moving around. And I mean, if an Indy car moves around on the banking at, any racetrack, you're in trouble. You're in the wall. But when you're running a big car through some fast corners at Sonoma, you're just drifting here, then you're drifting there. No, you don't have brakes. If you get on the brakes while you've still got some load left or right in the car, you know, you've got to be super conscious of the fact that the car is going to move around. And it's, but that's familiar to me just because of the cars I'd ran in my earlier part of my career before I even got onto slick race tires. That's the point. I mean, literally the NASCAR cars feel like they're running on street tires essentially for such a heavy car. And that's fine. There's nothing wrong with that. It's just like, it's nice that I could hark back to that type of experience and go, yeah, okay. Now they got a ton more power, especially the Sprint Cup car was massively more powerful. The one I ran at Sonoma with no practice, never sat in the car before. And then we went out for the 1.5-hour practice session on Friday and promptly broke an axle. I literally got about 8 minutes of practice time in the car period before qualifying. And I'd never done qualifying before. I mean, I was dead. I basically scraped in dead last because it was there were more people there to qualify in. And I literally took the very last qualifying place, but that's why the team had asked me to go, just because, you know, it's NASCAR, right? 75 grand the team got just for me qualifying in. I was like, they were happy. And I was like, I'm dead last. I suck. You know, it's like, they're like, no, you did good. Cause there were only 6-7 spots available for like 14 guys or something trying to get in. So it was good.
Yeah, I know we've had some drivers in the past that they come from, you know, winning championships and other series or, you know, late models or whatever, and they'll sit out there and they'll go practice or qualify and be 25th and think, well, that sucks. You know, I thought I was going to get the pole. Whereas the team is ecstatic because they're expecting 30th. So they're saying, you know, anything better than 30th is just a win for them. And I'm like, it's definitely a mindset you have to get readjusted to.
Absolutely. Yeah, that was the same way in the nationwide car. You know, I finished 15th, I think, in both those races. And of course, I was running right up front in Montreal. And there was a whole thing with Robbie Gordon and Ambrose and Kevin Harvick. And I was like second or third on the restart with 2 laps to go. And then I got, you know, whatever, stuff happens. But it was a great experience. It was all of that was a great. I'm so happy I got to do it. And you know, obviously it was like when Dale called me, it was kind of funny because he called me and he says, "Hey Andy, it's Dale Jr." I said, "Hey Dale, how you doing?" And I was playing golf, right? Which I love golf and I haven't played in the last 7 years, but I do love the game. I've just been too busy, but I do enjoy it when I'm out there. And he said, "You busy?" I said, "Well, I'm just playing golf right now." He said, "Oh, okay." He said, "I can call you back in a little bit." He says, "Well, it's kind of urgent." I said, "Oh, okay." He said, "Well, do you want to, he said, I want you to do a couple of nationwide races. You know, Dad and I talked about it." And I said, "I'd really like, you know, would you be interested? Would you be interested?" Imagine that, right? "Yeah, I'm interested." So completely ruined my golf game because I was all excited for the rest of it. It didn't matter. My golf game worth it. But anyway, that's how it happened. So he called me up and he said, "Hey, look, you know, this is kind of like, figure this is kind of a payback." And I was like, wow. So that's how it happened. It was great.
It's awesome. You know, finally, you've had so much of your history is tied with, you know, with Corvettes and all. So I was wondering, what's your favorite generation of Corvette?
Yeah, no, I mean, you're talking the street cars, right?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, I certainly have a fond memory for the C3, and I'll tell you why. In 1981 to 1982, I was driving my little Volkswagen Rabbit GTI, the first new car I ever bought. I'd moved to El Paso. I was in Pontiac, Michigan for my first year in America programming. Then I got a contracting assignment in El Paso, Texas, believe it or not. And I'm running down I-10 and I'm going past this mall that's on the side of the road, going west. And I see this silver C3 Corvette bombing across this parking lot. And I caught it out of the corner of my eye. I'm like, what the heck? And I saw cones and I saw this Corvette. See, it was a C3. And of course, I immediately got off the freeway, went and checked it out. It was an SCCA autocross. And I got to know the guy with this Corvette over time. And so I have a soft spot for the C3 because it was that's my first foray into competitive driving of any kind with this El Paso autocross while I was there. I really like the C5 Z06, the 405 horsepower Z06 from the 2002-3. I thought that was a superb car. The C7 Grand Sport, I really think that was a complete package. You could take that car onto the racetrack as a track day guy and have no issues with it. Great piece. And I think I'm waiting now for the next Z06 for the C8. And I think amazing job. I mean, incredible that Corvette did a C8. When you think about it, with the engine, the mid-engine vehicle, when you've had so many generations of the same, a huge credit for them to do that. And I think they pulled it off. And the value of that car is amazing. I like the C8, but I like the high performance one. So I'm waiting for the Z06. Assuming the rumors are true. Cough. Yeah.
That's awesome. Well, Andy, for the people listening to this, if they want more information on you or your foundation, where can they find you at online?
Yeah, it's tsef.org, which is Traffic Safety Education Foundation.org. Either way, you can spell it all out, or just tsef.org. All the stuff everything's free. DVDs are free if you're a teacher or a parent. I know DVDs are old school, but teachers still want DVDs in the classroom because the firewall, they can't stream. Everything's available streaming. And for me, they can always find me on other places. Just put up Andy Pilgrim. You can find me.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Andy.
Thank you very much, Brandon. It's been a pleasure, mate. It's been a pleasure.